And tell folks some of the other things that Maurice Strong says in here.
Well, Maurice Strong, of course, as we know, was picked up by Rockefeller himself, groomed from a young boy, and he's been in God knows how many top United Nations positions. Currently, he's set up by the United Nations to even further the integration of East and West in China. He lives in China at the moment. They're still working for the UN. He's been in charge. He was the one who set up the Biodiversity Treaty on behalf of Rockefeller. We're all under it now, this Biodiversity Treaty. We have no rights at all as humans, and every insect on the planet now is elevated much, much higher than we are. And it's to do with natural resources. The sharing of natural resources cannot be left into the private hands. It must go into these elitist organizations. That was all done at the first Rio conference they had. But Maurice Strong, when you go into his history, you'll find this in public broadcasting networks, in the television sector. They did a documentary on him, and when he was in China, he went to a graveyard to put flowers at his aunt's grave, and she was the best advisor to Mao Zedong. These families are international, intergenerational revolutionaries for this New World Order. It runs in their families.
Well, that's why in '76, the huge editorial written by David Rockefeller saying Mao did a great job killing 60-plus million people. I mean, they're proud of their mass murder.
Yes. Yes, they are. And they also highly laud the population reduction for abortions, mandatory abortions in China. Remember, they have said personally, and the United Nations has also said, that China is the model state for the world to follow. We've all to follow their policies.
Continue with what they plan to do to us on record.
It's out in the open now. There was a whole bunch of British newspapers came out about a month ago. I read them on the air, mainstream media, where the Optimum Population Trust, another big non-governmental organization backed by the foundations, came out and called for the same policies as China to be mandated in Britain and the rest of Europe very shortly. They got front-page coverage, whole pages on this, and the government has some of these characters on their board. You know, the governments appoint people. The real players are appointed, they're not elected, and they appoint the tops of these groups on their panels for discussion, and then they implement policies and laws that affect us. So we're not run by any kind of democracy whatsoever. Democracy is a sham. In fact, democracy is just the staging rockets to allow these NGO boys, the real parallel government, to get on board with government and dictate to them.
And let's be clear, these videos of George Hunt that we've been posting for years, a lot of times he's the one even leading the meetings with Maurice Strong there. And he was there, and they started talking about getting rid of all of us, and this freaked him out, so he brought him out. But just bone-chilling to then see the New York Times and Washington Post every week with articles about, oh, look, the fifth grader comes home and writes up dossiers on mom, and the school has the kids in England and the U.S. writing mock tickets to their parents for taking a hot bath or having the wrong kind of light bulb or using too much AC. So the children are the little persecutors now, and the parents are in the news going, oh, I'm so proud of them tattling on me, just like in 1984 where Winston's upstairs neighbor is so proud of his kid that's tattling on him, and then even when he gets picked up and put in the prison, he goes, I'm so proud that my son turned me in. I don't know what it is that I did, but I'm sure I'm guilty. I'm glad Big Brother's going to torture me to death. And that's basically what the American people and Brits are like now. It's like, thank God the kids are turning us in. Okay, Alan, again, you keep pausing for me to interrupt customarily, and I do add, I think, some important points, but I really want you to sit down and continue rolling with their operation, their plan, what's coming next, some of the other facets. Really, I normally guide the interviews. I'd like to sit back and let you follow your fancy.
Well, what we have really is a very ingenious plan that's going to use environmentalism and a war. Remember the Club of Rome, one of the premier think tanks that not predicts the future, they create the future. They create realities for the upcoming generations. They come up with the ideas, then they give it to the lesser think tanks to find ways to implement it through media, movies, and novels to society. Well, they came up in 1970s with the idea of global warming. And they say in their own book, the two founders say in their own book, The First Global Revolution, that they were looking for a way to unite the entire planet under a warfare scenario. It would have to be warfare because when there's war, like world war going on, the public will allow their rights to be taken away from them. They'll all work together for less. They'll eat less food and rationing and so on. And they have a common purpose, a common cause. At least they think they do. And government can then expand and take over various areas of their lives where it didn't interfere before. Therefore, a war scenario had to be dreamed up. And the one that they hit upon was global warming. They said that would fit the bill. That's their own words. That would fit the bill. After looking at other ways to do it, that one would fit the bill. Now, when these guys come to a decision like this, and they're unanimous, they never change their agenda. So if it's written 30 years ago, 40 years ago, you can take it to the bank. They will carry it through. Even if we're up to our eyes in snow, they'll still say it's global warming. Now, under this guise of environment and saving the world environment, because man's at war with the environment, that's what they say, man's the enemy. We all have to reduce our populations, which ties in exactly with the United Nations. They've said that in their own charter for the Department of Agriculture, the United Nations ultimately will be responsible for doling out the food to every nation in a quota system. And eventually, they'll use it as a weapon. If you don't reduce your population, say in the United States, they'll give you less rationing. And of course, even if you try and keep up or keep to the right quota of population, they'll give you less next year or 2 years' time once you're used to the idea, until you keep reducing it and reducing and reducing your population. So there's disincentives to have children.
And we already see that. California's getting rid of the tax credit for children. Australia's gotten rid of it entirely, and now says in their news they're going to start taxing having kids. And then they even have parents come on that are stakeholders. That means they're minions. They always have these little rent-a-mob groups who represent the population saying, oh, I love it. I think it's a great idea. And I had the British scientist on last year who was all over the news calling for wartime rationing of food and water and carbon footprints, water footprints, to have laws to make us skinnier, not eat as much, being fat is bad for the earth, even being a few pounds overweight. They say you've got to be rail skinny. So a total tyranny, and he's hailed as a great guy, and I had him on, and he basically said, yes, we're going to control everything you do and have carbon rationing on eating food. And I had another scientist on, and he said that I would have to be sent to a re-education camp if I didn't conform. Absolutely.
They've been using techniques like this for years on children at school. And now it's to go into the adult world as well. And what they're training us is that we have no privacy, of course, that government inspectors can come into your homes at any time, regardless if you think you own it or not, and put restrictions on you.
Unisex bathrooms. All of this is about destroying all privacy, all identity, anything that's associated with normal biological activity in the species must be destroyed.
Anything, in other words, that you would naturally fight for, they're training you not to fight, but just to acquiesce and give in. That's the whole key to we're getting trained. And under the threat of environment, the catastrophe, then they're going to use this. They're already using it, of course, to come into your life in every single aspect of your life, right down to what you eat and how much you eat. And are you eating meat? The Royal Society put out a report the other day. Now, the Royal Society is an incredible society. It's got a royal charter to exist. And every famous scientist that's ever existed was a member of it. But it also has listed openly in its own records and history that it was the first totally Freemasonic scientific institution ever set up. So these guys literally, again, are part of the big think tanks. They help plan the future on a political, a socio-political basis. And they have said that we should stop eating red meats. Now, what's the Royal Society doing, telling us to stop eating red meats, you see? Until you tie it in with their agenda, because we find that H.G. Wells, in his book, Utopia, and he was an earlier member of the same organizations, he said the world will be vegetarian, completely vegetarian worldwide. You find the same thing in Toffler's book, Alvin Toffler, the big futurist.